It is your world. My name is Gladys Gashanja as we celebrate the Day of the African Child. Access to a child-friendly justice system is the theme of the day, and I must say I've learned a lot in as far as that is concerned, and even the general rights of the children. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we will be joined, or are now joined, by Justice Martha Koome. She is the lead of the NCAJ Special Task Force on Children Matters, and also joined by Sankara Caroline, who is the Executive Director for Akili Dada. But before the ladies get into the conversation, let's take a trip around the world. And students from a New Hampshire high school take ski lifts to attend a graduation ceremony at the top of a local mountain. Since large groups can no longer gather as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, Canet High School came up with an imaginative way for students to graduate in person whilst maintaining social distancing.
We didn't want to do just a drive-through. We wanted to do something special, and this is really symbolic of the Mount Washington Valley.
So when this all started happening, I was obviously just super nervous about kind of what was going on and what we would get to, if we were going to get a graduation or if we would get to see our friends before the school year ended. So I was kind of expecting a virtual graduation or maybe not one at all. But for them to put together all this and get to go up all the way up Cranmore and take photos and also just see people passing, I thought it was so cool.
It meant a lot. It was nice that we didn't have a virtual one and it was in person. I could see all my teachers and principal and then receive my diploma in person, obviously, which was nice.
Incredible experience being able to go to the top of the mountain, receive my diploma up there against the backdrop of my hometown. It's incredible.
Getting used to the hashtag new normal. Now over to Sierra Leone in the continent and the Takugama chimpanzee sanctuary, where 96 chimpanzees rescued from the forest as sheltered has been under strict lockdown for the past 2 months. Now, opened 25 years ago, the center has just recovered from the Ebola crisis that is in between 2014 and 2016, and its management team now fears for its economical survival as it usually makes most of its income from visitors. Now, the center rehabilitates chimps which were rescued after mistreatment from owners or orphaned after their families were hunted in the wild for bushmeat. And closer home, the Ugandan government caused outrage when it announced in late November that it was authorizing a consortium led by Bonang Power and Energy to conduct a feasibility study on the construction of a 360-megawatt dam in the Murchison Falls National Park.
Decide on that. We cannot just say no or yes without a feasibility study.
Our tourism industry will be we lose a lot, and we are getting a bit of money in that industry. So if we put on a dam, we are losing the reason why people come here.
I would prefer that it is preserved as a national heritage. Indeed, it is the flagship attraction for the Murchison Falls. I've been here quite a couple of times, and I'll tell you, I keep coming here because of the attraction that Falls offers.
We lost Bujagali Falls, we lost Isimba, we lost Karoma Falls, Agago is going, and several other falls, in fact, in the country. Why don't we spare this particular one? Are we going to dot the entire Nile with dams?
Well, it is your world, even as we come to terms with the disruption of the Covid-19 pandemic. And as I mentioned, we are now joined by Justice Martha Koome and also Sankara Caroline, who's Executive Director at the Akili Dada. Sankara, maybe you can start us off by explaining to us what exactly the Girls' Bills of Rights is.
Yes, so thank you. Let me begin by saying that the theme for the day today is very critical. It's very important. For lasting social and economic progress in Africa to be realized, we really must focus on the children because the children are just simply our heritage. That said, more than 130 million girls worldwide are out of school. One girl under the age of 15 gets married every 7 seconds worldwide. So the Girl Bill of Rights is actually, it's a document that was written by girls from 34 countries, 16 countries in Africa. And this Bill of Rights just highlighted things that the girls thought and the girls believe are actually very important to them. So the Girl Bill of Rights, so there are 10 rights. I'll go through them very quickly. One is the right to free education. Second is to equality. Third, the involvement in decision-making and pursuit of leadership positions. Fourth is documentation. Fifth, comprehensive sexual education and access to free and quality reproductive health care. Sixth is protection from harmful traditions and enjoyment of positive cultural practices. Seven, safety from all forms of violence. Eight, decision-making about their body and sexuality. 9, protection under the law without fear of unequal treatment. And 10, freedom from exploitation. So when you listen to these rights that the girls want ratified and advocated for within our communities and our world globally, you realize that these are not unique rights. These are not rights that are outside of the box. So girls are actually asking for things that are within our constitutions. These are things that have already been listed in the UN Convention of Rights of Children, African Charter of Rights and Welfare of the Child. And a day such as this, where we are talking about access to child-friendly justice systems, is not a day where we are supposed to continue advocating for things that we've been advocating for since 1976, when the kids in Soweto were marching on the streets and there was a massacre. So if you think about it, these are things that we are supposed to have already upheld. These are rights that girls want achieved. And, yes, there's the argument between boys and girls, and we, it's quite a traditional argument, but then the truth is that systemically and historically, the girl and the woman has actually been marginalized for a very long time. So these girls who put this together, this document has gone all the way to the UN headquarters and has been presented to the UN Women representative. And right now what we are trying to do is we want it ratified. So far, so good. 376 people across the world have ratified it. We need 100 million signatures. The essence of it being ratified is so that governments can now amplify it. Organizations that are bigger, or even civil society that are more regional, are also able to amplify it, and these might just get into law. And so that's where Akilidada is coming from. And thank you so much for holding this conversation at a time such as now. It's very critical. And thank you. Okay, now Justice Kome, just listening to Sankara, it makes me wonder, we have seen very many laws passed through the years, even since our 2010 new constitution. Why is it that we seem to be very lax in making the rights of the children a reality?
Thank you very much, Gladys, for inviting me to this panel, and it is indeed my privilege to appear with eminent and fierce defenders of girls' rights, children's rights, like Carol and Juliet. The issue of children's rights is central, because children are the greatest stakeholders in everything that we do. Just like they realized many years, 44 years ago, that they had to stand up and fight for their rights against apartheid. The struggle continues. African child lives still matters today. So the Constitution of Kenya is very explicit in defining the fundamental rights of children and access to justice. Their participation is secured in the Constitution. But Gladys, that needed also to be translated into a registration, an act of parliament. Of the Children Act is necessary. You may ask why so many laws. Of course, I agree implementation is a problem, because all those rights Carol has talked about feature, but the implementation is a problem. So that is why we continuously ask that we simplify the laws into policies, into legislation, into standard operating procedures that help us understand easily how to deal with a child. Like the children bill that is now pending, and everybody is asking why it has been pending for the last 10 years since the promulgation of the Constitution 2010,
Yes.
has two very unique features. One, diversion, so that children do not have to go through the justice formal system.
Yes.
You've read our report. It says 80% of children in justice-holding institutions ought not to be there. They ought to be diverted. And also the criminal age of responsibility is too low. It's 8 years. So when you go to the rehabilitation centers in Kenya, the remand homes, it is full of children, little children under the age of 12 who do not even know who they are, leave alone what offense they have committed. So we are asking, justice does not just begin in the courts of law. It begins from the family to the community, and it is a collaborative effort when a child has committed an offense or is in conflict with the law. We say it's because of a failure of a system. The family has failed to direct the child, to counsel them, so that they have fallen afoul with the law. So when the police arrest the child, they are not supposed to battle that child in the cells and produce that child to court. They are supposed to find out from the parents and the social worker and probably the chairman of Jumba Kumi and the teacher, what is the problem with the child? And because many of these are infractions, the children have probably stolen something so that they can sell and buy maybe a phone or something. Those issues ought not to be escalated to the court, because the experience is that when you go through the formal justice system, it handles you. It changes you, not in the positive, but in the negative. So we need to protect our children. We need to provide for them a system that can always secure their best interests.
Okay, we hear you, Justice Kome. And Sankara, I'm curious to know, what would it take for this to be ratified right here in Kenya?
So what it would take for this to be ratified in Kenya is for one, civil society to rise and amplify this Bill of Rights. That's one. Then two, obviously, the media has a very important role to play. And, you know, what we've experienced over time is that a lot of organizations work in silos. And it's the same thing, you know, that the lady, Dr. Nkatha was highlighting around, you know, harmonization. Can we all work together? Can we all use the instruments that are already, you know, within our disposal for us to actually advocate for things, you know, through one voice? That way, people are not operating from, like, you know, different spaces and different places. So there's a website that is gbor.org. So if you go in there, you have access, click on it, read it again. There are just 10 rights, and then go ahead and ratify. And this was put together by Akili Dada and an organization called She's the First and Maya.
Excellent. Now, we said today is the Day of the African Child, so we have the real VVIPs. We had two before in the previous hour. Now we have one in this hour. Her name is Joyce Nyawera. Joyce, karibu sana, and happy Day of the African Child. Can you hear me? Okay, I seem to not be hearing her, but we shall be getting to her in a moment. And let me come back to you, Pauline. Even as we think about rehabilitating our children, I see a question here, and let me relate it to the UN Convention on the Rights of Children, which prohibits life imprisonment without possibility of release or capital punishment for those under the 18 years of age. To be precise, Article 37. Is this the reality here in Kenya from your experience?
Thank you, Gladys. This is not necessarily the reality. in what is happening. And just to respond to that, in the discussions that have been going on previously on how we need to handle these children, we need to come up with programs that take into account, one, their development, to ensure they are also able to access certain services, to ensure that they are able to be rehabilitated and are also reformed, to ensure that they are able to also access other skills in the specific spaces where they find themselves. So detaining children will make them retrogress in terms of development, and they are not able to continue with fully developing as children and engaging at that level. So this is why we are also calling for the enactment of a children bill, just to emphasize that some of these programs are actually in that bill. For example, diversion that had already been mentioned, and other platforms where these children can be able to engage.
Thank you. And Justice Kome, I'm curious to know, with the recent or the current pandemic, how has that now gone to put to the fore or shine glaring, issues in the system in as far as kids are concerned? And what did the tribunal, or rather the task force, come up with as recommendations?
Thank you. The recommendations by the NCAJ Special Task Force on Children Matters was very, very clear that detention or deprivation of liberty of children should be as a matter of last resort. Family is identified as the best institution to nurture the child. The Children Act, the one we are seeking to be reviewed, is also very clear that children matters should be handled expeditiously. In this country, I think we only have 2 laws that have a time frame within which a case should be completed. And that is the Children Act, that provides for between 3 months and 6 months at the maximum. A child should never be in court for a year. And the Erect Act. You all know the Erections Act is followed religiously. There is no erection petition that goes beyond 6 months. But when it comes to children matters, because of one problem and the other, and because the justice system works as a chain link, one institution, if one institution is weak, it weakens everybody else. It doesn't matter how good you are. If we are so good and efficient as the judiciary, then we need the police to be also up to scratch in terms of investigations, the prosecution as well, and also the children officers, who are the social workers who provide the social report, and also the parents or the community who support the child to come to court as a witness to ensure that all that happens without any delay. So because of this elaborate coordination that is required to ensure the best interest of the child, sometimes there is a delay. But we try as much as possible. The task force has recommended there should be service weeks conducted by every court station regularly to only focus 1 week in a month or after 2 months on only children matters, mop them up, ensure there is no backlog, and ensure that no child is being detained. And the same form of task force is cascaded to the court level, and we call it Child Court Users Committee. That is the one that monitors on a daily basis what is happening to children. But before I stop, I also want to acknowledge what is being done by Carol by highlighting the plight of the girl child, because those are also our concern. Because like last year, but we were faced with a pandemic, almost like the COVID, of so many girls getting pregnant. Like 500,000 girls getting pregnant. That plows back all the gains that we have made, because those are very many cases of poverty.
Yeah.
So I agree, whatever efforts are being made to ensure that we protect these girls from early child marriages, early pregnancies, should be supported by everybody, because it is their human rights and it's the right thing to do.
Very well said. And even as we wrap up this conversation, in a few statements, maybe from you, Juliet, is it possible to achieve a child-friendly, sensitive justice system in this country, considering the circumstances we just highlighted?
Yes, it is. It is absolutely possible to achieve it because, as I said, you know, short of, I think 10 years now in practice. And I can tell you, when I first walked into a court to represent a child who was a victim, as a lawyer, I didn't have a voice to be able to represent the child. But the Victim Protection Act came in and gave me a voice to be able to represent this child. I could only then be able to advise the prosecutor, but now I can be able to do it. I can tell you that the prosecution, for instance, did not have a department on children matters, and so therefore a child would be prosecuted, as Monica said, just like an adult. You'd have moments where a child is giving their evidence and they're being shouted at, they're being told, no, ongea haraka, you know. But we went into these courts and we talked to the prosecutors, we talked to the police, and now we have a DCI, Child Protection System unit. We have a department within the DPP that is focused on children. We have a National Council on Administration of Justice task force for children matters. I tell you, there is a lot of possibilities. There's only one thing we need to do. We need to put our money where our mouth is. We must. You see, Article 19 of the UNCRC talks about the government or the responsibility of the state to take care of children from all violence. And it says in decision making, administratively, legally. I mean, if Parliament needed a law to help them establish as to why they need to give as much money as they can to children, that article, which is law in Kenya because of the Constitution, the UNCRC demands of us as a state to actually put money to protecting our children. And so therefore, we need to look at it in those facets that I said: infrastructure, practice, policy, language, break it down to the very everyday need of a child, and it will be established. But we need the money. That is one of the things that is really, really needed. And of course, we need to pass the children bill, because that's the only law right now that actually focuses on a child. And do you know what else it does? It helps the child to create demand. You see, until the child is able to ask for their rights, we will just be having people like you and I and a few others to try and push and advocate for these rights. We need the child to demand for his or her own rights. And speaking of which, before I call it a day, let's hear from Joyce Nyawira. You have been a child rights activist, a child yourself. What is the one thing you would like to stand out on this day of the African child in as far as being heard and being protected?
Well, first of all, I'm glad to join the show, and I am really happy, and I'm a very proud African child, because I believe that the future of Africa lies on me and all the other children across the board. But today, as we celebrate Day of the African Child, there are some rights that really stand out for us. We have the right to education. Okay, today as I was going through the Kenyan Constitution, Chapter 4 of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and also Section 53 of it, we can see the Constitution has clearly outlined the rights of children everywhere. But it is so saddening that we have the rights in just written form, but I feel like most of the laws, most of the policies are just written, but we don't have the execution of it. That is why you'll find that most children do have a voice, but they're not given an opportunity to air them. So I feel as we celebrate this Day of the African Child, one of the main thing that we should focus on is to help children with platforms to air their views, and also be part of the policies and the execution part of the policies that are made.
Okay, very well said. The real VVIPs of this day, which are the children, even as we mark the Day of the African Child. A very thankful for all the panelists that were part and parcel of this conversation. We've learnt a lot, and clearly a lot of suggestions put across there, and the stakeholders, we hope, have heard, and this will be implemented in achieving and safeguarding the rights and the welfare of the children. Now, as I bid you goodbye, in the spirit of appreciating all African children, we welcome you to sing with Damian Soul and Ubongo Kids on the Day of the African Child.